Let's get into it. Today, one of today's presenters, we have two, is Lisa de Gregorio. She's the Director of Operations, the National School Counseling Leadership Conference Coordinator, and Professional Development Specialist for Hatching Results. She spent more than 6 years at the CPS District Office as a lead K-8 counselor. Lisa is also the co-author of the text Hatching Results for Elementary School Counseling, Implementing Core Curriculum and Other Tier 1 Activities. Lisa is joined by Kirsten Perry, an SEL specialist for CPS, serving 29 schools in the Englewood and Auburn-Gresham neighborhoods. She also serves as a president-elect for the Illinois School Counselor Association. And Kirsten was named the National School Counselor of the Year by American School Counselor Association in 2018 for her work at Lawndale Community Academy. So Lisa and Kirsten, I will throw it over to you. Thanks again so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, let's get into it here. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, school counselors. I think we have people joining us nationally, so you're from all parts of the country, and welcome to Recession-Proof School Counseling, Strategies During Uncertain Times. I'm Lisa de Gregorio. Thank you for the nice introduction. I'm joined by Kirsten Perry, and probably what's fun to know is that Kirsten and I go way back. When I was a K-8 school counseling lead at the district office, Kirsten was a K-8 school counselor and joined a cohort I had, and I've had the pleasure of seeing her through her career be awarded and recognized for her great work. And now, most recently, she's become a social emotional learning specialist with Chicago Public Schools. So I'm excited to do this with her today. I want to start with a disclaimer, not to panic. There's no hidden agenda or secret information that we have related to job cuts or anything for school counseling. You know, in the past few years, we've really seen as a profession better student to school counselor ratios. There's been strong commitments from states and even school districts to solidify what that role of school counselors is. But we all know that in general, when there are tough decisions that need to be made about budgets, you know, typically cuts start to be made from the positions furthest from the classroom. And historically, as a profession, we've been challenged for legitimacy as a profession. So I just wanted to write this as a call to action to sort of reimagine our role in a remote learning world. I think everybody is adapting, but going beyond that and really utilizing this as an opportunity to define our role. So if you haven't already, the article that this is based off of is posted on the Hatching Results blog, and it's linked here. When you get the presentation later, you'll be able to click on these hyperlinks and access a bunch of resources. We've included additional resources and examples and things throughout the presentation because we are school counselors at heart, and we know that school counselors love resources and love examples. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. So we know now that more than 72% of the world's student population, according to UNESCO, has experiencing school closures. And that means more than 177 countries. This is impacting about, you know, nearly 51 million public school students in the United States. And that's as of May 15th. This number is always changing. And the real issue here is that we just don't know how significant and how long this economic downturn that we're experiencing will be. So it's hard to really predict what the degree of impact will be. We can expect that budget deficits will persist for years to come, and that the economic downturn will be greater than that of the Great Recession of 2008 to 2009, simply because schools and districts require more right now, not fewer resources, to kind of meet the public health guidance and safety precautions for staff and students. And then all those precautionary measures that need to be in place cost money. Also, addressing student academic lapse, their social emotional learning needs, staffing, resources. So they're challenged simultaneously by cuts in funding. So unemployment is on the rise. We know that a lot of school districts depend on state funding and property taxes or corporate activity taxes, but as small businesses close, states are seeing less revenue. So it's safe to say that, you know, we need to be prepared for economic challenges. And it can be hard to imagine, but we have to be prepared. We have to make predictions with the information that we do have, and we need to innovate and make sure that school counselors have a place at the table in these important conversations. So there's a lot of planning assumptions being made. Experts are predicting what school could look like when they reopen amidst this global pandemic. And we can look to procedures that have been put in place in other countries that are kind of opening already. And if you refer to the article, there's a podcast with a school counselor named Rachel, who is currently in China. And she talks about what measures were put in place upon reentry. I've seen videos being circulated of what the school day looks like in Germany, for instance. So what we can expect is that the typical school day will look anything but typical. We probably won't follow an academic schedule the way that we have in the past. Schools will be trying to avoid large crowds and groups of kids together. Students may be attending on alternating days or in shorter shifts. Students may even come in for like 10 or 15 at a time for a few hours of instruction, and you know, that will be blended with virtual learning maybe on other days. So we definitely know there's going to be precautions and safety measures in place. This can include staff and student temperature checks, requiring face masks, definitely frequent disinfection and hand washing measures, maybe even plastic barriers between desks or in the cafeteria. So these type of guidelines are being prepared. And in the article, I reference what's come out of San Diego. But just this week, I think on May 19th, the CDC released considerations for schools. So I linked that here, and I would suggest that you take a look at that. So really, the aftermath is too vast to predict and comprehend. But by looking at what we know of the economic consequences of the Great Recession and the plans that are being developed, the guidelines that are being released for reopening, school counselors can work towards recession-proofing their programs now. So in order to do that, I kind of came up with 6 key strategies. And these strategies, of course, are no guarantee that you can truly recession-proof, you know, your position. But my hope in sharing, my hope is that and sharing your school counseling program results and being indispensable right now, that will make a difference later if and when cuts are considered. So let's get into the strategies. The first one is really building your knowledge base and skill set. And I identified 3 key areas right now related to technical skills, data proficiency, and the mental health and social emotional learning development of our students. There is an abundance of free tutorials, free trials, upgraded accounts, webinars, online learning courses, podcasts, and I know it can be very overwhelming, but I would ask you to reflect on where are the areas you most want to grow. Where are your strengths in terms of your competencies? And are there knowledge areas or skills that you can build right now to make sure that students have the SEL skills and those coping strategies that will be required to manage their emotions, face their grief and loss, and really face the trauma that they're experiencing. So use this time to capture data on what you're doing. Those well-being check-ins I'm sure you're doing with students, the calls, the outreach that you're making, track that time so that later you can demonstrate what you did. Use this time to maybe read a book, take advantage of a webinar, something, gain knowledge in these web applications and all the tech tools that are out there, and even ways that you can make e-learning more fun and effective. The next one is being resourceful. You know, during difficult times, it's really easy to kind of get distracted by excuses or technology mishaps. I myself, you probably see, and I failed to mention, having camera issues with my built-in camera. So that's why you're not able to see me right now, but we're going to, you know, move past that and keep with the program. So there's a lot of ways that you can think outside of the box and make things happen. If you are unsure about confidentiality parameters right now, seek those out, review your district policies, look at the ASCA ethical guidelines. If you're having access issues to students, think of ways you can collaborate with the teachers. Find inventive ways. If school-wide programs and events have been canceled, find other ways to deliver those and help the students and families still have some sense of a connection to school. Think about all of the resources out there. There's so many great ideas being shared, even in those Facebook groups for school counselors, like the Elementary School Counseling Exchange. There's one for every grade level. And utilize technology tools. There's some really inventive tech tools out there that offer language translation that will protect your privacy, will give you a secret phone number, for instance, so that you could still reach out and make calls. And I've linked here through Hatching Results, the company, there's a tips and tricks kind of handout for remote school counseling and what that could look like at Tier 1, those universal school-wide activities and parent-family engagement activities that you're doing, and at Tier 2, those kind of more intentional outreach and activities. So take a look at those. The next is to stand out as a leader. And what I mean here is, you may think you're a leader, you may know you're a leader, but stand out as a leader. You need to be seen as a leader. Be heard and speak out, advocate for school counseling. Now is really the time to kind of take this bold stance and support education and support our students and families. You can help encourage state departments and district leaders to use funding. that's available in those relief funds to be dedicated to supporting SEL skill building, your counseling program, and get involved. There was a question that had come in about state legislation that can be pushed. And I think this question was specific to Illinois. And what I would say is, reach out to your local state school counseling association. Find out what is the legislation out there? What are the opportunities to write your state representatives? Or maybe even start your own campaign. And I know in Illinois, I think back in 2016, ISCA, the Illinois School Counseling Association, had written a white paper that was very many pages long, but it included some excellent advocacy points for advocating for school counseling positions. So reach out to your state association, have a seat at the table, be involved in that virtual learning plan. And if you're finding that your teachers union, your educators union for your district is not including school counselors and what your day looks like and what this means for your role in a virtual learning world, advocate for that. Make sure that school counselors are included in that language. And be sure that you're part of the conversations with your district and with your school principal for what that reentry plan looks like when students come back. For Be a Partner, what we're really talking about here is, I love that saying going around that we're all in this together, but we're all in different boats. So even for you, this is a tough time for us too. I know a lot of people are looking to us for those supports, but we're going through this too. So think about how others can support you and support your program. And I know Kirsten will get into that a little bit later. You know, to a greater extent than ever before, parents are so responsible for their children's education right now. I mean, a lot of access to students is actually dependent on parents, especially at that elementary level where you might call and it's up to the parent to hand their child the phone so that you can have that conversation and touch base with them. So think about how to be a partner and how to offer assistance. There's some great tech tools out there like S'more and Wakelet that offer language translation. I know Wakelet even offers, it'll read the audio for you. So if there's issues with language or reading level, Wakelet even has that option. So think about how you can be a partner now and an ally to your teachers and your administrators. The next is to really brand and promote the program. And there's a lot of ways that you can do this. You need to think about, if someone were to ask you, what do you do? Why is the school counseling important? What's your role here? You need to be able to answer those questions. So we like to suggest that you develop a sort of elevator speech, or at least spend some time to think about how you might answer these questions and communicate the program purpose and your desired outcomes. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. Again, there's some great visual tools available like Canva and Adobe Spark that would help you to create a newsletter to market your program. You can include some of your data and your results for what you did do this year if you have that available, or even some sort of a brief presentation that incorporates some suggested activities for over the summer, a thank you for the school counseling program, a kind of looking forward, looking ahead to the next school year, anything like that. So the next one is being indispensable. School counselors are not auxiliary. We're not unnecessary. We are not extra. We are essential. And when schools reopen, when students return, we have to have a plan to help them heal and bring back that sense of security. You know, the repercussions of COVID is going to span health. We're going to see grief and loss. We're going to see employment issues. We're going to see families being displaced as a result of the economic impact, or maybe some changes in their family. And we need to be ready to assist and be prepared for this. So be indispensable now. Make sure that you're seen. Do really what school counselors do best. Think about how you can meet the needs of parents and the family right now. Maybe you're hearing from your check-ins, from your meetings with the teachers and the administrator, that parents are struggling at home with behavior, or keeping their children motivated, or meeting all of the daily activities. So think maybe there's something you can do to prepare some ready-made resources, like a sample schedule to use at home, or some sort of a rewards chart or something like that. Think about the resources. If you have families that you're worried about financially, or that certain student populations that you're worried about, find a way to meet the needs of all students. Create a resource page, and implement activities that will increase that connection to school right now more than ever. And that could be like a virtual spirit week or something like that. And I know for a lot of us, we're getting towards the end of the school year, but I in the article, you can find a lot of ideas, and hopefully you can find something that kind of resonates with you and will make sense given your the parameters in your situation. So recently there was this blueprint for back to school that was released by the American Enterprise Institute. It's kind of a report that was compiled by a task force that included like former state chiefs and superintendents, and it sketches out a plan, how to plan appropriately for reopening. And it actually, on a positive note, it calls for districts to kind of assess the need to employ more school counselors and other student services personnel, especially in terms of whole child support. So there's a great opportunity here to be a part of the conversation as to what our role in this virtual learning, remote learning world is, and insert ourselves into the plans being developed for reopening schools. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Kirsten Perry, who will kind of dive deeper into how school counselors can meet the needs, so the social emotional learning needs of students.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. And then if you could unshare your screen, and then I'm going to share my screen. Okay, good afternoon, school counselors and school counselor educators. My name is Kirsten Perry. I know many of you on the line today, so I'm happy to be in good company. School counselors are my people. So I know Lisa touched on this a little bit when she spoke, about supporting the SEL needs of students in her article. And also how we don't really know what the future is going to look like as we return to school. We don't know if we're going to continue to be virtual. We don't know what different model might be in place. So even though we don't know what's going to happen, we could still start to think about how we're going to prepare for when we go back. And what we do know is that this disruption that has happened internationally has really highlighted the importance of social and emotional learning. And one thing that we've known, especially us as school counselors who have expertise in the area of social emotional learning, we've always known that there is a correlation between social and emotional competence, academic and post-secondary outcomes. But I think that this pandemic has brought social and emotional learning to the forefront in a way that it has never been brought to before. And I think that that does make school counselors in a very critical position to not only implement social and emotional learning practices, but also to make sure that we're training and supporting all of those around us and how to implement these practices. So as we prepare to return to school, we also need to think about how are we going to renew our schools, because we know that so many have been impacted by this pandemic. So speaking of that, I did some, there's a resource at the bottom of this slide, just reading about just in general how students and families and individuals are impacted by catastrophic events, because we've seen different things happen in the world, and you know, people experience this in different ways. So it's important to keep in mind that, you know, though we might experience this in one way, it might be different for somebody else. There could be a lot of different responses to a catastrophic event. So they could be physical responses, cognitive and emotional responses. One thing that's really unique about this experience is that no one has ever experienced this before. Not even our grandparents experienced something like this before, and to this magnitude. And there's been so many losses that have been experienced by our students and our families and even our staff members. And I really always like to hold on to that idea of loss. We know that there's a lot of families who've experienced death to a family member or friend or a loved one to COVID-19, but also to recognize that loss can come in many forms. We experience loss every day. That could be loss of jobs and income, loss of time with loved ones, loss of celebrations, loss of opportunities. There's been so much loss that's been experienced, and even though it's not death, it should be treated in the same way as the grief and loss process. We can't always get these things back. We can't always get these opportunities back. And also to realize that during this heightened sense of emergency, that a lot of our students and families have experienced abuse in a different way, knowing that for some of our students, school is a safe place, and to be at home for this period of time is very traumatic for them. So just to acknowledge these different experiences that everyone is having, including ourselves. I wanted to bring awareness to everyone that CASEL actually just recently published this guide to returning to school. And in this document, they came up with 4 critical action items for schools. And one thing that I do want to point out is that though these are critical action items for schools, these are not things that school counselors should be doing in isolation. And these are school-wide interventions. So I wanted to take a look at what those 4 critical actions are, and then as I go into the rest of the presentation, we'll kind of get a better understanding of how school counselors specifically can support these 4 critical actions. So one is, they said, take the time to build partnerships. So remember, those partnerships can be within the school building, those partnerships can be with parents, and those partnerships can be with community members. Make sure that we are really truly deepening our understanding and our plan for social emotional learning as we return back to school, however that might look for us. Making sure that we're designing opportunities for adults to connect and heal and cultivate their own SEL competence, which we will talk about in a little bit. Creating emotionally and physically safe, supportive, and engaging learning environments that support all students' SEL needs, and making sure that we're using data to deepen our relationships and continuously improve support for students, family, and staff. So when you do get this presentation, the link to that document is on this slide. So how can school counselors specifically support this work of social and emotional learning as we return back to school? So one way that school counselors can do that, because we are experts in this domain, is really make sure that we know and we understand what those 5 core competencies are: self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, relationship skills, and decision making. So really making sure that we understand what those are, and we're educating staff on those social and emotional competencies and ways in which that they can integrate it into the classroom. Also for ourselves, and intentionally creating time in our schedules for relationship and community building activities for students and families, and also for explicitly providing SEL instruction. Another thing that's really important right now is that we don't overlook the fact that we need to explicitly talk about COVID-19 with our students and families. We have to provide that information and that support to really reflect and process, what has happened and how it has impacted us, and how we can continue to build resilience and coping as we move forward. I had mentioned this briefly before, but also building social and emotional competence in adults. We often say if we can't take care of ourselves, we cannot take care of others. So really making sure that we acknowledge the fact that this pandemic has also impacted our educators, including ourselves. There is a report that was done that says that this pandemic has added to educators' anxiety, worry, and stress. And so really, keeping that in mind, and that as much as we push teaching social and emotional competencies in our students, we also need to build those competencies within ourselves so that we can reflect and manage. And there is studies done that say that teachers that are skilled in regulating their emotions report less burnout and more of a positive effect while teaching. So how can we support this? So aside from explicitly teaching SEL competencies, it's really important that we are creating that space for self-care. So while there's a lot of studies done about this, but when teachers are working with students who have experienced trauma, that they experience something called secondary traumatic stress, and they could also experience something called compassion fatigue, which can lead to burnout. So it's really, really important that we are making sure that our educators have a space for self-care. What I'm saying now, whatever this looks like as we go into our futures, is allowing teachers to have that time. Like some schools in Chicago, we call it a prep period, really making sure that we're leaving our staff members alone to do their work at that time, and we're giving them that space that they need. Let people take a lunch and not be interrupted. And make sure that we create those spaces in school buildings so that staff members have a chance for self-care. We could do things as school counselors to encourage staff to have a daily commitment to self-care, because often as educators, we overcommit ourselves to others, and we need to make sure that we provide that space in our daily schedule, that we're committing to ourselves and our own self-care. Also making sure that adults have knowledge and awareness of community supports and mental health supports and resources to take care of themselves. And that is not only for staff members, but also for ourselves as school counselors, because often not only are we caring for the social and emotional needs of our students, but also for staff members. So how are we making sure that we also have support for ourselves? And like I said, really making sure to create that space for connection and healing. And as we go back into the school year, how can we intentionally design that space with staff members so that we can renew ourselves, refocus, maybe create a new mission and vision statement, and reconnect and heal as we move into the school year. Also, school counselors are very critical in helping staff members identify the mental health needs of students. So really taking your expertise in social and emotional learning to help staff members understand the signs of trauma and mental health, because we know a lot of our students are going to be coming back to school, even more so after the summer, which is often the case, and making sure that they really know how to identify what those, make sure that there is a referral process, and that there's a way in which you're collecting data so that you understand who all the students are in your school building that need additional supports. I also really highly recommend doing a needs assessment. We can't just assume that we know what is going on with our students and families. The only way that we could really identify what they need is to provide a needs assessment. So make sure that we're really intentional about putting that needs assessment out in the beginning of the school year so that we can best understand the kind of interventions and supports that families need as we return to school. And with that data, also identifying small groups and individual check-ins. And one thing I will say too is that us as school counselors, we don't necessarily need to be the only person doing those individual check-ins. We can create a network of people within the school to check in with students. So maybe you could be the lead on helping to assign students to maybe a favorite staff member or a favorite security guard or a favorite custodian, just to make sure that all of our students who maybe need that check-in have someone checking in with them regularly. And then also, with that being said, make sure that we have an updated referral list for hotlines and community partners that can support the social and emotional needs of students. Lisa had mentioned this earlier, and I'm just emphasizing this just to make sure we have a seat at the table. Sometimes school counselors are not included in these team meetings at schools, and it's really, really critical that we are at the table and we are there to help acknowledge the SEL needs of our students and even the attendance needs. So making sure, if there's a behavioral health team at your school, an MTSS team, grade level team, that you're there and you're helping identify these students who need additional support. Those of you who know me know that I'm a big advocate for restorative justice practices, but one thing I have been seeing in schools is that really virtually punitive practices don't really work anyway. So it's really important that we are thinking of how we're implementing restorative practices, and whether or not we go back to school, it's really important that we are looking through that restorative lens, because punitive disciplinary practices could potentially re-traumatize some of our students. So again, really making sure staff know how to identify signs of trauma and making sure that they are using trauma-informed practices in their classrooms. So that could be incorporating mindfulness techniques, classroom circles, those kinds of things. I actually do have a link at the bottom of this slide in case you're not familiar with these practices. Also, making sure that we are assisting students and staff with resolving any kind of conflict through peace circles and restorative conversations. So I know there was a question about, how are we serving our most vulnerable and our students of color in particular during this time. And I will say this, that is the community in which I serve. I serve in Inglewood and Auburn Gresham, and that's pretty much 100, pretty close to 90 to 100% of my students would fit into that. So I definitely can identify with this question. So one thing, if anyone's been reading the news, is that this pandemic has really exposed and exacerbated existing inequities in our education. Some of our students who have been traditionally cut off and not provided equitable services continue to do so, and you could even say that the gap that existed before has further widened. So it's really important that we don't turn away from that, but instead we look more closely at that, and we acknowledge that a lot of our students may not have had the access and the support that they've needed in virtual learning, and as a result of that, that they could be academically behind. It's really important that we do advocate, because school counselors are advocates, that we're advocating for additional supports for these students as they re-enter school. So thinking about additional tutoring, mentoring, and outreach. And it is that these are often the communities that are hardest hit. I know that in Chicago, particularly, our Black and Brown communities have had some of the highest COVID-19 rates. And so we need to really acknowledge that our students who are traditionally traumatized are being re-traumatized. So how are we making sure that we're working together to support our students? And the reality is that often those who need more get less. And I can't say that that's not going to continue to be the case. So what can we do? I know that I have talked with some teachers who've been doing a really, really great job of engaging with their students, and even in the young grades have had really good participation in virtual learning. And I asked, how did you do that? And their advice was they had daily contact, and kind of that idea that though every student needs some adult that's looking out for them, and even though we're working virtually or we're going back to school, making sure that our students all have someone, whether that's an older sibling, a cousin, an uncle, and really working to make sure that our students have someone that's making sure that they get on and they're engaging in their instruction every day. Also really making sure that we reach out into our communities, because like I said, often those who need more get less. And I know this through experience because I've worked in communities like this for so many years, that we often don't get what we need. We need to stand up and we need to fight for our students, but also look into the strengths that are already in the community. There's so many amazing community organizations in our communities. So how can we connect with them and make sure that our students are getting the support that they need? I think Lisa had mentioned this earlier as well, making sure that when we're providing information to families, that we're providing it to them in the language in which they speak. Another interesting thing to think about is transitioning, which is very unique right now, and it does have a social and emotional impact on our students. We have students transitioning from 8th grade to 9th grade in Chicago. I know in some other schools, maybe even elementary to middle school, or high school to post-secondary. And just like when we close a group, how are we also thinking about how we're bringing some sense of closure for our students from the previous year? Because for many of them, it's a loss, like they haven't had their graduation ceremony. So giving them some kind of opportunity to maybe, connect with their former classmates or a teacher, doing some kind of event, a well-wish to really bring closure from the previous year, and think about how we could potentially do that. I know that my son is graduating college, and he said to me, that it's weird to think that he's never going to see some of these people again because he's not getting that sense of closure. So kind of, thinking about how we can create those opportunities for our students. And then finally, really, really taking a new look at our school counseling program as we're preparing for re-entry. Revisit your mission and your vision statement and think about the needs of our communities, where we stand right now, and how maybe it's changing a little bit. Making sure we're getting feedback from our community members, our parents, and our students to make sure that our school counseling programs are servicing the needs of our students and families. And like I said before, really intentionally looking for those equity gaps. Who are the kids that are not engaged, and how can we get them engaged? And do a root cause analysis and a needs assessment to really understand what our students and families need and how we can deliver that. I really think working collaboratively is really important. And I know Lisa had mentioned this earlier, how are we making sure that staff members are value that school counselors bring? So really pulling out your mindsets and behaviors and sitting down with staff and asking, how can you support their classrooms, and selecting mindsets and behaviors together. And then being visible, make sure that students and families know how to connect with you, share your programs, make sure everyone has access to your calendar, because really school counselors are game changers. We all know that. And so it's important that we are a part of all the discussions happening throughout the school and supporting students. So that's it.
Yeah. We wanted to, thank you for being here, chatting with us today. This is a global pandemic. This is a crisis. It's leaving a mark on all of us, multiple generations. So this is a lot to digest. This is a lot to process. We know it can be overwhelming. We just want to thank you for being here, taking this step. Want to encourage you to take a deep breath, take that time for yourself, give yourself some extra patience and self-care and circumspection, and then get ready and be prepared. Take what we know, what planning recommendations are coming out, and make sure you find a way to be a part of those discussions, have a seat at the table, and come up with that plan that for reentry, so you're part of the school community and you're there to serve students in the way that only a school counselor can. So with that, I think Sarah will be opening it up for questions. Were there some you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, Lisa and Kirsten, just thank you so much for being here. I think you can see in the chat, there's a lot of really kind notes and messages of gratitude. So we're just so thankful that you were able to be with us today. We did have some questions come in through our registration platform. And so I guess I'll ask some of these. And then certainly, as we said at the top of the presentation, if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask verbally, you're welcome to use the raise your hand function, or you can pop a question into the chat box and I will manage that. We do only have a few minutes, so let's get started. There's one question that came in. How can I best support my elementary, specifically K to 2nd grade students as a school counselor if we either do go back in the fall or we extend virtual learning? So in either scenario, some recommendations on that.
You know, I would say for our littles, our young students, you know, they're very resilient, but I think what's important is to, as much as we can, create some consistency for them and some sense of normalcy. We need to normalize whatever those measures will be in place for the school day. We need to model that in a way that is not anxiety provoking. And we need to respond to their social emotional learning needs in an age appropriate way, right? So whether that means having pictures of emojis and they select you know, one to kind of demonstrate how they're feeling, but just talking to them, you know, just talking to them about their experiences and their feelings to the best, you know, extent that we can, and maybe using words like, you know, what's a sunshine and what's a cloud in your day today, or, you know, those metaphors of, you know, roses and thorns or whatever it might be that's age appropriate. So I don't know, Kirsten, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, you know, I feel, you know, I've been supporting about 29 schools, the Inglewood and Auburn Gresham areas, and I think this is true probably for most schools, not just in the communities that I serve, but, you know, I think in most schools there's been the biggest impact on our youngest children, K, you know, pre-K through 2nd grade. There's been pretty low attendance rates overall, and I think that this is happening not just in Chicago. I'm pretty sure it's happening all throughout the country. And I think, you know, what that reason is because we need parents to also be engaged to help our students log on, to help them complete the activities. And so I think that, you know, we have to look at engagement in a different way. And one thing I've seen, I've spoken to some teachers who've been doing a really, really great job of engaging with those younger grades. And they have said, I think I said it earlier, you know, really making sure that we have not just weekly communication, but daily communication with families about, you know, class is starting in an hour, and finding the best way to communicate with our families, whether that's an email or a text message or however they prefer to be contacted, and also making sure that our young kids, especially if they're the children of an essential worker, you know, that there's someone, whether that's an older sibling, a cousin, an aunt, someone who's helping them gain that access.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying earlier, to think what would help the parents right now. And maybe it's just a video, you know, get together with someone. If you have a tech person at the school or something, record a walkthrough for the parents. I could speak from personal experience with my husband. I know he could use a walkthrough on how to utilize Seesaw and that, and where to look for the activities. You know, they want to do the best. So think about how to lessen that burden and make sure parents are equipped with what they need, you know, to support their kids in that independent learning, really. That's what it is. You know, when it's virtual, there's a lot more independence there they have to have.
Great. A couple questions came in through the chat that I thought would be interesting if we have time. One was, Kirsten, while you were presenting, there was a question about needs assessments and if there are any examples of those that you would specifically recommend. We're able to share resources too through our community chat section of our website. So if you wanted to share a couple, and then we could pop those in.
I actually just, you know, what's interesting with needs assessments is that often we're self-creating them as school counselors. I do have some that I created for Chicago Public Schools that I can share. Maybe I'll give them to you, Sarah, because I'd have to go find them, but I do have some needs assessments that I could share.
And I'll speak to that too. I'd say to be resourceful. If you look in the article, you know, ASCA has a COVID-19 resource site, but there's also another one I linked. And then those Facebook groups, there is an elementary school counselor exchange. There's one for middle school. There's one for high school. I see all the time school counselors posting, can anyone share an example of a school-wide survey for parents, for staff? So be resourceful. There's a lot of people sharing these things right now. So Kirsten will share the one she has, but there's a lot of that being exchanged in those sites. There's really a wealth of ideas there.
Excellent. That's really helpful, I think. All right, so let's wrap up. We have one more that came in through the chat. Emily had mentioned that in short order, they'll be having students complete an end of year survey. They're interested in capturing data that will help them prepare for next year, questions certainly specific to this very unique time. She was curious if there's a survey already created that could be recommended. So kind of along the same lines, just.
Yeah, you know, there are some, again, I would say, maybe I could put it into the chat here and then it would be recorded, the exact link. I'm looking through the article here to see in which section I linked it, but they have actual counselor submitted samples and templates. One of the COVID-19 sites I was just talking about, that was created by a task force of like 50 school counselors and administrators. It's linked in the article.
And Lisa, we'll have that article also linked again.
Yeah.
Resource section of the community chat. So if it's directly linked in there, then certainly folks can take a look. And
yeah, I would suggest that you look in there. There's for sure there's counselor submitted kind of exemplars, you know.
Wonderful. Good. So I think Kirsten and Lisa, unless you have any sort of last minute comments, we probably should wrap up. It's 2:29. I like to run a tight ship. We are so thankful. You just have been such a wealth of knowledge and insight, I think. Are there any sort of last notes that you'd like to share?
I think for me, I just want to acknowledge all the hard work that everyone's been doing. I know Lisa and I were talking about this earlier today, just we've been working so much more than we have in the past. And just acknowledging that and just, you know, remembering that we're all here to support each other and, you know, make sure that we continue to share our ideas and our practices with each other because we don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, I want to just mimic that. I love school counselors. We love school counselors. It's just amazing what you do every day. So I just want to thank you for doing the very best that you can and for, you know, stepping up to the plate and doing what it takes to meet the needs. I mean, this is a crisis and it's unprecedented. So together, we're trying to find a path through it and make our way out of it. So thank you for being here with us, and you know, have a good rest of the school year, I guess.
Thank you both so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions that weren't addressed, or you think on this a little bit and you have some things that you would like to speak with Kirsten or Lisa about, certainly shoot somebody at CFE a note. We can certainly get that to them. And then I also believe their emails were included at the end of one of the slide decks. So we would encourage you to do that, reach out, continue this community building feel. And I think this is, you know, one of the bright spots that is coming out of this is that we're able to do community sessions and sort of have discussions like this that I think are really important. So also, if you have any ideas for future chats of ours, we are planning on doing these through certainly the end of the school year, and then sort of periodically over the summer, and then into the fall, I would think. So if you have any ideas for those, that would be quite welcomed. And again, just thank you, just to reiterate what Lisa and Kirsten said, we're just so incredibly thankful for everything that each and every one of you has been doing the past several weeks and continue to do. We're here for you. CFE continues to be here for you today and in all of the days and weeks that are to come. So we hope you enjoyed yourselves today, and we wish you happy Fridays and happy Memorial Day weekends. Be safe.
Thank you. Thank you, CFE.
Thank you, everybody.